Thanks for listening to this audio podcast from Crossgate Church in Hot Springs, Arkansas. We invite you to visit us at crossgate.org. It is our hope that you will hear from God and draw closer to Him through this service.
Thank you so much, prayer partners. Nancy, love praying with our people, and I'm so grateful for each and every one of you praying along with us today. I would ask you to take your copy of God's Word and find Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. You might even need a table of contents to find that. That's okay. Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. And as you're finding that, let me simply remind you of something that so many of you already know, but it's worth repeating, that at Crossgate Church we have 7 priorities. Those priorities are glory, truth, love, prayer, community, generosity, and reach. And last August, just a few months ago, we actually took an entire month to talk about our reach priority, reaching our neighbors and the nations with the good news of Jesus Christ. Why do I share that now? Well, I simply want to tell you that we're going to have a follow-up opportunity on that for some additional equipment and training beginning this Wednesday evening. And for the next 4 Wednesdays, I'm going to be leading some collective training on the practical ways of how to have gospel conversations. That's really what it's all about in terms of sharing that good news with our neighbors and ultimately with the nations. From 6:30 to 7, beginning this Wednesday night, for 4 Wednesday nights, we're going to be here in the worship center. So men's ministry is going to come in here, women's ministry is going to come in here. Others who would like to attend may come in here as well. From 6:30 to 7, I'm going to share some very practical things here in the worship center. And then everyone's going to break out to their respective areas, men, women, and so forth, for some practical exercises and some very practical discussion questions on how to be equipped to have gospel conversations. Our student ministry is actually going to be doing the exact same thing, focusing on gospel conversations up in their area for the next 4 Wednesday nights as well. And so I would love for you to be a part and just come and let me share with you how to have effective gospel conversations. Now, let's get into our teaching series for this Sunday, beginning a new teaching series in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, let me ask you a question. Very important theological question. How many of you have ever heard of Anakin Skywalker? Anybody heard of Anakin Skywalker? Any Star Wars fans out there? A few of you know who Anakin Skywalker is. Well, obviously, a guy who started out with absolute and total promise. A guy who had unbelievable giftedness and all the advantages possible to advance for a positive way. And yet, not long after he started out, things kind of went sideways, didn't they? And he started out as the promised one. Next thing you know, he's killing off young Jedis. And then his mentor has to chop his legs off because of his foolishness. Then he becomes a Sith Lord named Darth Vader. He chops his own son's hand off. And ultimately, he's lying there, dying, gasping and wheezing for air, full of regrets and not full of life. That's Anakin Skywalker in a nutshell. Tragic story in the Star Wars universe. But today, what I really want to talk to you about is a guy in the Bible who I consider to be the Anakin Skywalker of the Bible. It's a guy named Solomon, and his story is very similar to Anakin Skywalker's story in a sense, in that he started out with unbelievable giftedness, unbelievable blessings and resources. I mean, the likes of which no one had ever seen before. Yet eventually he started spiraling out of control, drifting away from God to the point that his life had eroded physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Sadder and wiser, yes, but full of misery and regrets. You know, Solomon's story is a very interesting story, and just so we're all on the same page, I'd love to hit just a couple of the milestones with you, just so we're all understanding about whom we're going to be speaking this morning. You can sum that up in about 7 words. The first word is coronation. In 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2, Solomon was coronated king. He was crowned king when his daddy David passed away. Of course, there was a lot of political maneuvering in order to get Solomon on that throne. I mean, even Jim Guy Tucker would have probably been proud of Solomon the way things worked out, right? I mean, he became king, coronation, and then wisdom. 1 Kings chapter 3, God appeared to him for the first time and said, Solomon, ask me whatever you want, I'll give it to you. And Solomon said, I want wisdom. And God said, you know what? Because you did not ask for treasure, because you did not ask for long life, and because you did not ask for defeat over your enemies, I'm going to give you wisdom, and then I'm going to give you all that other stuff as well in exponential terms. And that's exactly what God did. And God blessed Solomon unbelievably as a result of that meeting he had with God. 1 Kings chapter 5 through chapter 8, write down the word builder. Okay? Solomon took on the monumental task, God-given monumental task, of building the temple of God in Jerusalem, this unbelievable structure. Before, the people of God had a little tent, a little temporary tent that they would carry around, and that's where God's presence dwelt on earth. Then, God asked Solomon ultimately to build this temple, and they built this palatial structure in Jerusalem for the presence of God to dwell. Solomon was a builder. And then, write down the word admonition. Again, chapter 9, 1 Kings chapter 9, God appeared to Solomon a second time, personally, and gave him this very strong admonition and promise. And he said, you know, Solomon, if you and your people will follow me and be faithful to me, I will bless you beyond your wildest dreams. But if you drift from me, if you turn from me, if you go the ways of the nations, the name of Israel will become a proverb and a byword among the peoples of this world. That was a very strong admonition. And then in chapter 10 of 1 Kings, we see Solomon's zenith or pinnacle. You can write one of those words down, zenith or pinnacle. He hit the absolute top of his game. In fact, I want to read a brief passage from 1 Kings chapter 10, just so you get an idea of exactly what this pinnacle was all about. Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, which in modern terms is about $1 billion a year in gold this guy took in. Besides that which came from the explorers and from the business of the merchants and from all the kings of the west and from the governors of the land. King Solomon made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. The like of it was never made in any kingdom. And all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. For the king had a fleet of ships at sea, and once every 3 years the fleet of ships would come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, peacocks. This guy was living large. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. And the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear this wisdom which God had put into his mind. By the way, 1 Kings 9, that's where the queen of Sheba, sometimes called the queen of the south, she came to Jerusalem, all of her entourage, to see exactly what it was that Solomon had and what he could do. And of course, what the queen of Sheba said was, even the half had not been told to me. I mean, I saw even twice as much as what I'd heard about. Unbelievable, this pinnacle, this zenith. But then write this word down. Downfall. In 1 Kings chapter 11, we begin to see Solomon's downfall. Look at this. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Yet Solomon clung to these in love. And he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. A concubine is like a quasi-wife. And his wives turned away his heart, and Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, and on the mountain east of Jerusalem. So he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifice to their gods. And then here's the last word, write down this word, judgment. God ultimately promised judgment would come upon Solomon and upon his house. And yet, God said, I'm not going to allow some cataclysmic, coup de grace judgment to fall on you for the sake of your father David and his legacy. But it will happen to your children and to the generations that will come after you. But Solomon himself experienced incredible spiritual and emotional and physical erosion to the point that at the end of his life, he had nothing but a handful of regrets. And into that context, right, that's the setting, that ultimate setting, that's the setting that gave birth to the book of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon says, you know what? I've seen it all, I've had it all, I've done it all. Take it from me. Life without God is meaningless. In fact, that's the very beginning of the entire book. That's the opening statement of the book of Ecclesiastes. Some translations say, vanity of vanities. Life is vanity. The New International Version says, meaningless, meaningless. All is meaningless. And over the course of this series, what we're going to see is that Solomon was talking along two lines. First of all, he occasionally talks about his own experience. He says, look, I've walked this walk. You don't want to go there without God. So sometimes he talks about his own experience, as he will today. Other times, as he will in the next few weeks, he talks about his observations on life. And you know, sometimes if you sit back and look at life and how life happens in so many places and to so many people, you'll lose your mind. Without God and without a godly, Bible-based perspective on life, you'll go just as crazy as Solomon did, with all of his frustrations and his inner torment and all the rest. Because at the end of the day, the message of Ecclesiastes is this: without God at the center of your life, life is meaningless. Only through God and ultimately through His Son, Jesus Christ, can you find true meaning for this life. Now, let's think about this book. Okay, the first thing I want you to see this morning is the tone of the book. All right, the tone of the book. Ecclesiastes, in many cases, is cynical. Sounds kind of pessimistic, if not even dark at times. Listen to this. Here's the introduction, verses 1 through 11. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who will follow them. Now again, the theme of the book, vanity of vanities, meaningless, meaningless. Why do we remember that? That's the drumbeat of the book, especially beginning in the first couple of verses and on from there. The word vanity or the word meaningless is the translation of a Hebrew word, hevel. Hevel is the word. The word hevel means something that lacks substance, something that lacks meaningful substance. Sometimes it's been translated smoke or vapor. Some people have even translated it soap bubbles or cotton candy. Things that seem to deliver but deliver nothing. That's what the word meaningless means in this case. And please understand, Solomon was not simply a philosopher who was sitting back stroking his beard saying, I like to think about these kind of things. Rather, Solomon was a man who was in the midst of wrestling with these things himself, because he had tried this and he had tried that and he had tried all these things apart from God. And so he's speaking from experience, friend. And we would all do well to hear him when we consider the tone of the book. But as I said a moment ago, today Solomon is going to share some things about his own life. Now we've already kind of covered those milestones in 1 Kings 10, or chapters 1 through 10. But I want to hear it straight from Solomon. Let's hear it straight from Solomon in the tale from the king. Okay? The tale from the king is where Solomon begins to talk about these experiences from his own perspective and all these different things that amounted to nothing apart from God. First thing that he talks about is this: worldly wisdom. And when he talks about worldly wisdom, what he's talking about is just this incessant desire to have more knowledge, more information. He's not necessarily talking about godly wisdom. He's talking about pursuing, say, one college degree after another. And I guess I'm a little guilty of that. I was a professional student for 10 years myself. But just, I got this degree. Now I got this degree. Then I went to this thing. And then I gained this. And I wrote this book. And I'm just gaining more information. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 12 and following. Listen to this. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ever ruled over Jerusalem. Before me, I have experienced much wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to understanding of wisdom, and also of madness and folly. But I learned of this, that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. What is Solomon saying here? I'll tell you what he's saying. He's saying when you remove God from life's equation, nothing will add up. Did you know that? When you remove God from life's equation, nothing will add up. That's his pursuit of worldly wisdom. But what about his pursuit of worldly pleasure? His pursuit of worldly pleasure. Continue looking in Ecclesiastes. This is beginning of chapter 2. I said to myself, now when you start having a conversation with yourself, look out, Jack, right? I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. My mind still guided me with wisdom. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem. There were no Joneses to keep up with. Solomon was the Joneses, right? I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers. He had his own band. And many concubines. Remember, 700 wives, 300 concubines. What's going on, Solomon? The delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. Now that's spoken like a man who has not God in the center of his life and chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Unbelievable. The guy had unlimited resources, unlimited wealth, unlimited pleasure, women galore, and yet he said it's all meaningless. Now, that's crazy when you think about it. Here's a guy who could not find pleasure in the things that this world says provides pleasure. You know, you look at people, we've got more access to people's lives now than ever before, don't we? Right? I mean, through what? Social media. And what you see in other people's social media is what? The vacations, the exciting times, the fun experiences, the houses, the cars, their activities, their kids' accomplishments, all of these things. Do you think most people are as happy as their social media makes them out to be? Don't kid yourself, friend. I heard a story not long ago about a man who went to see a psychiatrist, and he was just weighted down with tremendous burdens and just depression and heartache and grief over all kinds of things, and he just laid it all out there to this psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist said, you know, I've got some counseling for that, and I want to give you some medication and this, that, and the other, but here's just one thing I want you to suggest. Just hear the suggestion from me. And the psychiatrist said, I went to the state fair last week, and it's going on this whole month, and I cannot get it out of my mind. There was a clown at the state fair. He was dressed up in a gaudy outfit. His face was all made up. I mean, he was hilarious. This guy he had the whole place rolling in laughter. And so the psychiatrist said, so I want you to go see this clown. I just think you seeing this clown, it's just going to give you just a little boost. And the guy that came in for the counseling, he kind of just buried his face in his hands, shook his head. And the psychiatrist said, "What? What? Did I say something wrong?" And the guy looked up and he said, "I'm that clown. I am that clown. I can put on a good show, but I am absolutely despondent and miserable inside." That was Solomon. He put on a good show. I mean, the Queen of Sheba came to see him because she thought he had it all. Come to find out, after the fact, as he's writing Ecclesiastes, he was as low can get because he realized that it did not provide satisfaction. Worldly wisdom, worldly pleasure. How about worldly legacy? Okay, worldly legacy. Look here, worldly legacy. Beginning in verse 14, "The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. And then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? And I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered." Solomon is concerned that he's the greatest, he's the GOAT, he is the man, and yet he's concerned that sometime after he dies, no one will remember him. He's pursuing worldly legacy. He says, the days have already come when both have been forgotten, meaning the person walking up and down Central Avenue and the richest person in Hot Springs. Sooner or later, they will all be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. You know, it may sound a little creepy to you, but one of my fascinations is old cemeteries, right? And there's just, sometimes I like to just walk through an old cemetery. You know, the really old ones with the ornate gravestones, people that died back in the 1800s, that type of thing. You know, we've actually got one of those cemeteries in Hot Springs, if you didn't know that, Hollywood Cemetery. It's just, it's right in the middle of the city and not far from my house. And so sometimes in the mornings when I go running, I will actually run through the cemetery. Sometimes I'll just walk for a moment, contemplate some of these headstones. Again, it may sound creepy, but I think one of the reasons why I'm fascinated by going through these old cemeteries is because these are very thought-provoking places, right? I mean, when you walk through a cemetery, you're going to be forced to think about some things that normally you don't think about. And I'm not just talking about the fact that you're going to die, because someday you're going to die, and I'm going to die. I mean, there's no way to get around that, okay? But some of the deeper reflections are things like this. I wonder how many people even remember these folk, right? Some of these headstones here, you can't even read the inscription on them anymore. It was somebody's parents, somebody's grandparents, somebody's brother, somebody's sister, but 100, 150 years later, you can't even read the headstone. Most of the people buried in that cemetery, nobody remembers them to this day. And I will tell you what, if you do not have a Bible-based, godly perspective on life and eternity, that will drive you crazy. That will absolutely drive you crazy and make you think that everything in life is meaningless, just like Solomon did. Right? I think that's why Moses said in Psalm 90 and verse 12, "Teach us to number our days, that we might gain a heart of wisdom." It's too bad Solomon didn't do that sooner than he did. That's the pursuit of worldly legacy. But here's one other, the pursuit of worldly effort. The pursuit of worldly effort, check this out. Once again, let's hear it straight from Solomon, beginning in verse 18. "I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for this. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune." Solomon says, you know, all this stuff that I have, someday I'm going to have to leave it to somebody else, and that drives me crazy. That grinds my gears. Now, I got to tell you something, y'all, okay? If you're over 65 years of age right now, you're probably already thinking about this, okay? But if you're over 65 years of age, you're probably already thinking that someday, probably in the not too distant future, you're going to have to turn everything you have over to somebody else, whether you like it or not. Oh, and by the way, let me just go a little deeper. If you're over the age of 65, somewhere, somebody is waiting for you to die. Did you know that? I mean, really. Now, I'm not saying that your relatives are just, just counting the days, okay? But I'm telling you, the older you get, the more someone is thinking about when you're going to die, and all the stuff that you have is going to come to them. Okay? And without a Bible-based, godly understanding of life and truth and everything else, that will totally drive you crazy. It will totally drive you crazy. Now, I want you to think about Solomon. Okay? Worldly wisdom, worldly pleasure, worldly legacy, worldly effort, all of that is meaningless apart from God. Meaningless apart from God. He struggled, and by the way, this is one of the things I love about the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon is just laying it out there. He's transparent, he's authentic, he's not holding anything back. We encourage that at Crossgate Church. That's one of the reasons why, for example, the men's retreat that we do in January and February called Elevate is so powerful, because it brings men into a setting where it encourages them and gives them permission to get real. I mean, to get real and get raw. And like it or not, that's what Solomon's going to do in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, I will tell you this. 10 or 15 years ago, I would not have been able to effectively preach a series on Ecclesiastes. You say, why? Why? Well, first of all, because 10 or 15 years ago, I was not willing to get honest about what I struggled with. Okay? I was not willing to get honest with myself, honest with God, honest with others about what I struggle with, because I struggle with things too. But here's the other reason why I could not effectively preach through Ecclesiastes 15 years ago, is because I did not have the empathy to connect with people who were struggling like I do now. Okay? Praise God, we're all works in progress, amen? Right? But I did not have the empathy to connect with people who were struggling to that degree. Okay? Now, that's the tale of the king. That's the tale of the king. The good, the bad, and the ugly. That's Solomon and what he struggled with, straight from his own mouth. The good news is that Solomon did not end this passage on a downer, on a sour note. Okay? Because I want you to hear the last thing that he shares, and that's the truth about the Lord. Okay? The truth about the Lord, check it out, verses 24 to 26, Ecclesiastes chapter 2. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases God, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. Again, Solomon goes back to this very important theme. Without God, life is meaningless. What can you possibly expect to find in life that's meaningful without God's definition and God's perspective and God's word and God's truth and all of that? You can't find it. Now, remember what I said last week at our outdoor service. Okay? Again, I've said this many times. The Old Testament can be summed up in one sentence. Someone is coming. And every book in the Old Testament somehow, some way points us to Jesus Christ. Even the book of Ecclesiastes. It points us to Jesus and the need for Christ as the ultimate manifestation of meaning in this world. How do we know this? Well, we can just talk to Jesus about it. Ask Jesus what he thinks about Solomon. Matthew 12, verse 42. Jesus said, the queen of the south, that's the queen of Sheba, we talked about her. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here. Or more specifically, someone greater than Solomon is here. Jesus Christ ultimately. I mean, think about it. In one verse, actually a half of one verse, Jesus Christ flipped the script on the entire premise of Ecclesiastes, at least in terms of the cynical aspect of it. You say, what verse is that? John 10:10. What else? Check it out. John 10:10. Jesus said, I have come that they might have life and have it abundantly. Don't you wish Solomon would have learned that earlier in life? That God ultimately wants to give us life, that Jesus Christ ultimately wants us to have life here and hereafter. But here's the great divine irony. And that great divine irony is this, that we have life through his death. We have life here and hereafter in eternity through the death of Jesus Christ.
We invite you to join us in person at our campus located at 3100 East Grand Avenue in Hot Springs, Arkansas. If we can pray for you, send us an email at prayer@crossgate.org. Thanks again for listening to our audio podcast.